So hi everybody, I'm Ranger Jackson Gibson. Thanks for having me out. This is not something that we had when I was in high school, so that's really cool. I really like the idea of this. My plan today is I'm going to give you all a little bit of a background about my educational history, and then transition into how I got into Tennessee State Parks, and then finally just some information about Tennessee State Parks for anybody who's interested. I started my education at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, but due to a childhood medical issue and complications that arose when I was in my late teens because of that, I ended up coming back to Middle Tennessee and went to Motlow for about 5 years while I was dealing with that, and then transferred to MTSU. My original plan was 4 years, get a history degree, sociology, political science minors. You know, I ended up being a non-traditional student, which I'll touch base on throughout this conversation. The reason I say that is because I'm very happy as a non-traditional student. I would not have gone down the path that I would have if those things had not happened. Once I transferred to MTSU, I ended up picking up another major in religious studies because of the support of the religious studies faculty at MTSU. And then, so then I was a double major, double minor. It takes extra work. I highly recommend it, especially if you're doing humanities. Interdisciplinary study is a major aspect of the humanities, figuring out the ways that the different subjects connect with one another, whether it's history, political science, religious studies, all of those things interplay, and being able to figure out how they interplay, how they connect to one another is how you build those soft skills that she was talking about that you can use later in your life for jobs and things like that. I also picked up a third minor while I was at MTSU, and that is Jewish and Holocaust Studies. I'm going to touch a little bit more on that one because because I was a non-traditional student, I felt a little bit of pressure, to be entirely honest with y'all, that I'd been in school for 7 years. I really needed to show something for it, so I tried to, at the end of it, just really rush as much as I could, get as much out of it as I possibly could. So Jewish and Holocaust Studies was one of those examples. I was political science. Jewish and Holocaust Studies has it. Sociology, Jewish and Holocaust Studies has it. Religious Studies, History, Jewish and Holocaust Studies had it. It was the perfect culmination of all the other things I was studying. But on a small side, I also distinctly recall in 5th grade, I went to McFadden here in Murfreesboro, taking home a permission slip and having my parents sign so that I could watch documentaries about the Holocaust. Then in 7th grade, I had a teacher who taught us and showed us documentaries about the Rwandan genocide. And the reason I mention that is because that was 15 years prior to me making the decision that I was going to take Jewish and Holocaust Studies. But because of the actions of those teachers back then, it was always in the back of my mind, and that's one of the major things that really pushed me to take on that new minor. And so I like always mentioning that because I think it helps illustrate how the things that your teachers do, the things that y'all do, your peers do, can really have an impact down the line when it comes to your career, when it comes to your education, and all those kinds of things. So I ended up picking up Jewish and Holocaust Studies. It was a great minor. I enjoyed my time at MTSU immensely. I'm not just saying that because MTSU is here, but the biggest impact I probably had was religious studies. They were very supportive. They've grown a lot, but it was a very young department when I first got there, and they did a lot of support, helping figure out ways, trying really hard to show people how religious studies and those other degrees connect to broader life, which will kind of take us into me moving into Tennessee State Parks. When I first heard about I knew about Tennessee State Parks as an entity, but I first heard about their seasonal programming while I was at MTSU. I had a teacher or professor who approached me and said, "Have you heard about this? You might be a really good fit for it." And Tennessee State Parks has a seasonal interpretive programmer or seasonal interpretive ranger position every summer throughout the state. They hire about 100, 150 people. I thought, yes, this is exactly what I want to do. I always wanted to be a park ranger. For some reason, I had never heard about that position. But as soon as I found out about it, that's what I wanted to do. Me having a religious studies background set me apart from everybody else. The most common degrees for park rangers are Parks and Rec, biology, history, things like that. I had the history, but I went and interviewed at a place called Old Stone Fort State Archeological Park. And while I was there were other people who had history degrees and things like that, but I was able to say, I had a religious studies degree. I can do research into the religious connotations of this site. It was a 2,000-year-old mound site that's believed to be a ceremonial site. And so because I had that background, I was able to set myself aside or apart from everybody else, and that's what ended up getting me that position. I used that research skills that I gained through history, through those humanity classes, to write a number of programs that kind of delved into the possibilities of religion and ceremonial aspects of that park. I then transferred to Cedars Lebanon State Park as a seasonal in Lebanon, Tennessee. It was during the fall, so it was kind of an off-season thing. Being a humanities person, I was really able to play up the fact that I was self-motivated. I knew how to complete and work on projects, because in that position, I worked 95% of the time by myself. And so I was able to show them from my time at MTSU and the projects I did there, what I could accomplish and what skills I had learned. I then transferred to the Tennessee State Park Central Office, and there helped work with education expansion and connecting state parks with schools. We mainly focused on low socioeconomic areas. And so again, having that research and then also the communication skills that you get with humanities really helped. We had to find ways to take what park rangers were offering and what state parks were offering and translate it into the vernacular and the things that teachers need, talking about their curriculums, their standards, things like that. So all these skills, I mean, I've barely touched on history, I've barely touched on religious studies. It's not because those weren't important. What's important about them wasn't necessarily the subjects I was learning about, it was the skills that I was learning while I was learning those topics. You'll actually learn, if you end up going down the history route at MTSU and everywhere else, you'll take classes called historiography, which is the study of studying history. And they will stress to you, the reason people don't like history in high school is because what's the number one thing you have to do? Have drilled into your heads, names, places, dates, things like that, right? When you get into college, the main things they want you to understand is the broad pictures. What were the catalysts of things? What caused this to happen? How did this connect to that? Those big picture items. Those are the skills that you learn. Having dates and all that stuff's not as important once you're in college. But having that ability to figure out point A to point B, what the cause and effects are, that stuff you can translate into other jobs. Then, just another aside, as far as recommendations on both for Tennessee State Parks, but then also more broadly when it comes to going down career paths. The number one thing, in my opinion, you can do is introduce yourself to people. The first time I interviewed for a full-time position at Tennessee State Parks, I got it. And I am adamant the reason that happened is because I knew every single person on that interview board when I went into that room. I didn't know them very well, but when I worked at Old Stone Fort, I helped at an event at Henry Horton State Park, and while I was there, I introduced myself to the manager of the park. He ended up being on the interview board. While I worked at Cedars of Lebanon, the manager of that park retired, and I introduced myself to the area manager during that retirement party. He ended up being on my interview board. And then I also introduced myself to the park manager for Bicentennial Capitol Mall while I was at central office, because they were really close to each other. That made it so much easier when I went into an interview. I was a lot more relaxed. I knew their names, they knew me. I knew nothing about them, but because I had that tension removed, it was a lot easier for me to interview. So, be professional, be polite, but absolutely take the opportunities to introduce yourself and talk to people when you can. So I interviewed for Bicentennial Capitol Mall State Park. I ended up getting that position. I'm the interpretive lead. I do not translate things. That's one of the major things we have. Do I know foreign languages? I unfortunately do not. The interpretive lead is tasked with setting up the education, programming, school trips, those kinds of things for visitors and others to come and learn about the park, learn about Tennessee history. The reason I was given that position is because of my background in the humanities. The reason I was hired is because of my background in humanities. When I went into that interview, they asked me, how can you deal with diverse people? Downtown Nashville has a very diverse population. It has the largest Kurdish population in the United States. There's large disparities in socioeconomic scales, things like that. I was able to say that because of my religious studies background, because of my history background, I knew how to understand people. I knew how to connect to them. I knew how to empathize with them, see things from their perspective. And so it'd make it better for me to work with those communities than someone else. So again, not necessarily the history aspect. I talk about history all day. I talk about Tennessee history. But the important thing was, how could I connect people? Once I was at Tennessee State Parks, you have to go through a number of trainings. So The majority of park rangers in Tennessee are required to be law enforcement, medically certified, and certified interpretive guides. The way I always tell people is we protect the park, we protect the people, we help people get connected to the park. For the law enforcement, we go through the Tennessee Law Enforcement Training Academy, which is the main training academy here in Tennessee. Most sheriff's departments and city police departments go through that. Then for the medicals training, there are about 250 rangers in total in Tennessee state parks. Over 100 of them are emergency medical responders. About 70 to 80 of them are emergency medical technicians, and we have 2 paramedics. And then finally, that certified interpretive guide is, again, that training is to teach you how do you write a tour, how do you write a school program, how do you write these engaging thematic tours and things like that to help people connect to the site. Do you think, like, Humanities helped with that a lot? We were able to do research. Even things like the police academy. I never thought I was going to be a police officer. I wanted to be a park ranger. I never thought I'd be a police officer. They loved us. They loved park rangers at the police academy because a lot of us we're required to have a 4-year degree. We come from college backgrounds. So when it came to studying, when it came to testing that we had to do every week, we were typically the people at the top of the class. When people started failing, we were typically the ones that were tasked with helping them study because we had those skills to do research, to connect the dots, things like that. There are other trainings that you can do for Tennessee State Parks. They are not required trainings, but there's wildland firefighting, there's search and rescue, there's crisis intervention training. All those touch on humanities as well. Crisis intervention training is specialized training for helping people who are going through either substance use or a mental health crisis. It's to help, again, communicate with them, build that empathy, talk to them, which is things that you learn through taking the humanities. When you learn the history of someone's culture, you're learning their history, but you're learning about them. It's the same thing on a much smaller scale when you're talking to somebody who's having a mental health crisis. You're trying to learn about them. Why are they in the situation they're in? What's causing these problems? How can you help them? What is the solution? Even stuff like the wildland firefighting. Project management is a major thing for wildland firefighting. You have to write if you want to burn even a few acres of land for a prescribed burn for the ecosystem, you have to write many, many pages figuring out what the wind conditions are, what the safety conditions are, things like that. Taking the humanities helps you figure out how to professionally and appropriately write those kinds of things. Search and rescue is great because of the information analysis that you have from the humanities. So every aspect of this job, or every aspect of any job, can be connected back to the humanities in some way, or at least those skills that you learn. Like I said earlier, the main work kind of values of Tennessee State Parks is helping connect people to the history and nature of Tennessee and getting them interested in preserving and protecting that history. If we're going to do that effectively, we have to be able to communicate with them. We have to make them care. I think a lot of y'all, if you're taking classes in the humanities, it's very easy, or it's easier to be empathetic with somebody when you're learning their story and you're sharing stories and making it personal to them. And so that's those same skills as well. As far as qualifications for the job, I said earlier that it's a four-year degrees required. It really does not matter what that degree is in. We have somebody with a linguistics degree in Arabic. We have English degrees, we have history degrees, we have all kinds of humanities. I mean, we have some people who have, my former manager had a minor in art history. What matters and the biggest takeaway is how you can articulate how your degree helps with the job. And that goes for anything, not just Tennessee State Parks, but any job. The main thing is how you can explain your background connects to the position that you're going for. Whether it was me saying that religious studies helps me connect to diverse backgrounds, or one of my coworkers has an English degree, so she was able to go into the interview and say, I know how to write very professionally. You were at the base of the Capitol building, you want to have really professional output of signage, brochures, all of those different things. So she was able to connect it to the site, to the job. Tennessee State Parks has a few different positions within it. The main one that everybody thinks about are park rangers. That's the the showy one that everybody sees. We do have interpretive positions. There are not as many of them, but they're creating more of them. Those positions are the ones who are tasked with maintaining museums, specifically tasked with doing tours and things like that, working with school groups and things. But then we also have behind that, the Tennessee Department of Environment Conservation, which is the state department that Tennessee State Parks is a part of. And that has anything from people doing art, people doing social media and communications, all kinds of different jobs that you could potentially go into. The reason I decided to go into this career is because of that large diversity in the job. We have 3 major trainings. I'm also responsible for the maintenance of the park. I run the gift shop. I mean, in the past week, I've helped someone with going to court. I went yesterday to a Carnegie library and taught some small children about the difference between wild animals and domesticated animals. Helped with a leak yesterday. That's not very fun. So we do all kinds of things. I have ADD. And so having a job where I have lots of things that I'm responsible for is really great. If I have a bad day or if I get stuck on a task, I can transition to something else. You do have to be motivated sometimes. But it's a really great job because you have that diversity and things to go into. And I keep connecting you back I feel bad for connecting you back to humanities, but that's the whole purpose. So having that humanities background helps with that diversity because humanities has that interdisciplinary aspect to it. So even if you're studying history, you're learning about politics, you're learning about art, you're learning about religious studies. So it's a very diverse and ever-changing discipline. And so that's one reason why I chose humanities. One reason why I chose this career was because it was easy to constantly be doing something.